Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and this is going to be a pretty interesting video. This is not going to be a normal review. We're going to be going over some stuff with the Bronco Wildtrak and answering a few questions, including whether or not you should wait for the Bronco Raptor instead of getting a Wildtrak, and if you should go for the Fox shocks that are now available on the Wildtrak as well. Before getting the video though, a huge shout out and thank you to the National GMC here in American Fork, Utah for giving me some time with this Bronco Wildtrak. They have this one available for sale right now. If you're interested, check out the inventory in the description down below. On a side note as well, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below as well. Let's get into the video. So something that people love about the Bronco Wildtrak is the fact that it comes standard with the upgraded engine for the standard Bronco, which is a turbocharged 2.7 liter V6. It goes through a 10-speed automatic transmission. It's good for 330 horsepower and then 415 pound-feet of torque. Now you compare that to the Bronco Raptor's 3-liter turbocharged V6, which produces 418 horsepower and then just over 440 pound-feet of torque. This is definitely lacking compared to the Bronco Raptor. But here's the deal. If you go back to the torque figures, this barely has less torque than a Bronco Raptor. Yes, it has significantly less horsepower, but rock crawling and off-roading is all about torque and not about horsepower when you're doing the slow speed stuff. And so from, you know, a off-road perspective, this is gonna feel just as good as the Bronco Raptor when you're doing all of the crawling stuff. Now the high-speed desert running, we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later in today's video, but the Bronco Raptor having more power is gonna feel a little bit better. Plus, a lot of publications have done acceleration tests with this versus the Bronco Raptor, and the Bronco Raptor is in fact quicker, but it's not as quick as you'd think, and a big part of that is because of the tires this has versus the Bronco Raptor, which we'll talk about in a moment. But anyways, this is a really solid powertrain is what I'm trying to say. Now this particular Bronco Wildtrak is of course finished in my favorite color on the new Bronco, which is green. If you guys can't tell, I kind of have a thing for green. And also National GMC has a ton of Raptors. That's my personal Raptor, but they also have a bunch of Raptors. They have Raptors and Broncos, which is awesome. Anyways, love the color, but let's talk about some benefits of the Wildtrak over the Bronco Raptor and shocks and tires and all this sorts of fun stuff. Anyways, first off, the Wildtrak gets this really sturdy front bumper, which is fantastic if you have any collisions with rocks off-road. Also, you got the tow hooks right there as standard. You got a bunch of skid plate protection just like the Bronco Raptor, so like all of that pretty similar, right? And then you guys can see here, this one has Bilstein position sensitive shocks. You can also get Fox shocks now on the Wildtrak package. They're the 2.5-inch diameter shocks. They're the same shocks that are on the new Ford Ranger Raptor. So the Raptor shocks you can get on a Bronco. And it's like a $2,000-something package. I'll talk about the benefits of those shocks over these shocks and all that kind of fun stuff in the driving portion of the video. But what you need to know is you can now get Raptor shocks with this. And so it kind of makes this very, very appealing when you compare it to a Bronco Raptor. On top of that, the Wildtrak only comes with the Sasquatch package, which gives you these 35-inch tall tires mounted on 17-inch wheels. The Bronco Raptor has 37-inch tall tires, which are great for ground clearance because this has over 11 inches of ground clearance, whereas the Bronco Raptor has like 13.1 inches of ground clearance, which is just ridiculous. But the downside for on-road driving is worse fuel economy, and it makes it a little bit slower to accelerate. Now, like I said, the Bronco Raptor is faster than this because it does have more horsepower, but it's not as big of a difference as you would originally think. And you can see here, this looks amazing. Something that's been really controversial about the Bronco Raptor is the fact that it has like the gigantic fender flares. So you guys can see how far these fender flares pop out. The Bronco Raptor's fender flares like just add about another hand and maybe a little bit more, and then that's like, this is where a Bronco Raptor fender flare would end. And it's all fender flare. Like the body's a little bit different with the venting and everything, but most of it's fender flare. And so this has like this cool classic Bronco appearance that looks really good, whereas the Bronco Raptor kind of looks a little bit funny. I think down the road, the Bronco Raptor is not gonna be as collectible as like these regular Broncos. That's just my personal opinion. Now, just like the Bronco Raptor, you have a solid rear axle, as you guys can see, and again, you got those Bilstein shocks there in the back. Look at that cute little recovery hook. But notice that the Wildtrak also has the hard top, which the Bronco Raptor you can only get with the hard top as well. So like, all right, same. And again, this has that cool Bronco appearance to it. Now, one of the downsides about the Wildtrak compared to the Raptor is going to be the interior. So you can get two different interiors with the Wildtrak. This one has the cloth interior, which frankly I think looks really cool. Got the normal Bronco Stadium seating. But the Raptor, you know, has the crazy Raptor seats, which are really aggressive. They've got like really aggressive bolsters that pop out, again, similar to what the F-150 Raptor has. So again, there is definitely that. And something else to mention here is actually, if we pop in, the Bronco Raptor has a full digital gauge cluster. This has like half screen, half analog. So that's kind of like another key difference. And I'll quickly show you guys a clip of the interior of my Raptor so you guys can kind of like see what I'm talking about in a moment. But this has the same exact infotainment system that the Bronco Raptor has. So like, you don't get any benefit from an infotainment system perspective. This still has dual zone climate, all that fun stuff. You still have a really solid driveline system, right? With 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel high, 4-wheel low, 4-wheel auto. And being the Wildtrak, notice that you've got a mud ruts mode, you've got a sand mode, and you have a Baja mode. You don't have a rock crawl mode, but you still can do quite a bit of rock crawling with this. This still has front and rear lockers. It still has trail turn assist. It doesn't have the stabilizer bar disconnect, but it's got quite a bit of off-road tech to it. And with that being said, I'll quickly show you guys the Raptor interior, and then we will take this out and drive this, and I will give you guys my final thoughts on whether or not you should get a Wildtrak or if you should get the Bronco Raptor, and also which shocks you should get with the Wildtrak as well. Now, the Bronco Raptor seats do look a little bit different than the F-150 Raptor seats, but very similar concept in terms of aggressive bolstering and all that. And then you also get like this big beefy steering wheel on the Bronco Raptor with like the giant paddle shifters, right? So there's that benefit. Full digital gauge cluster. Almost got a music happening there. Full digital gauge cluster just like this. And then you can like customize the suspension, the steering, the exhaust, all that kind of stuff, just like the Raptor, right? So it's got all this Raptor stuff that the F-150 Raptor has. So like if you like this kind of like gimmicky stuff, then I guess that you like the Bronco Raptor a little bit more from that perspective. So first off, gotta go off the curb. So we can see that shock compression. So setting off here in the Wildtrak, I want to talk mainly about shocks and driving and all that kind of stuff with this. And again, making a bunch of comparisons to this and then the, Bronco Raptor and the Wildtrak with the Fox shocks. So first off, with the base Wildtrak, from an on-road driving perspective, it is really solid. The independent front suspension helps out with turn-in and ride quality quite a bit. And the Bilstein shocks also help out a massive amount. So what Bilstein typically does with their shocks is they make it so that the initial compression point is very stiff. Now what that does for on-road driving is it makes it so that you handle better. So like if you're going around a corner, right, the shock's not just going to give up everything. You're not going to have that, wishy-washy side-to-side driving experience. What you're basically going to have is this stiffer feel, right? So then you can corner at faster speeds, and that's why this feels so much better from a handling perspective compared to like a Wrangler, for examples. Again, independent front suspension, but also how these Bilstein position sensitive shocks are set up. But once you get past that initial compression point, then the shock kind of gives up quite a bit more. And so basically what that means is that if you're going over little bumps and everything, this is going to feel pretty stiff. But once you go like big compression, where you go, like you guys saw it going off that curb, that's kind of like bigger compression. It absorbs it very, very nicely because it gets into the second, kind of like the second part of compression is the best way to look at it. And then the shock kind of gives up a little bit more. And hence why they call them Bilstein position sensitive shocks, right? Gives up a little bit more. So then it doesn't feel super harsh with the impact. Now, compare that to just Fox shocks in general. And what Fox typically does is they make it so that that initial compression point will give you like compression. It won't stay stiff. And that's why with Raptors in the past, for example, that's a cool Bronco, by the way. That's why Raptors in the past, for example, basically would kind of like track all over the road, is because the shocks would constantly be giving with turn. And so handling wouldn't be as good. But then when you go off-road, little bits of compression, you don't feel it because the shock is taking out all that compression. So what does that mean for you as a consumer? What that means is if you're going to be driving the Bronco on road most of the time, the Bilstein shocks are going to be the route to go because it's going to handle a little bit better, and you're going to want that better handling. You're not going to be using that slight compression you'll get from the Fox shocks. But if you're going to be doing quite a bit of off-roading with the Bronco, then you're going to want to get with the Wildtrak with the Fox shocks, because that little bit of compression it does off-road makes it so the ride quality is a lot better, and it makes it so that you can drive a little bit faster because, again, the shock is taking the beating rather than you and the rest of the suspension, right? So there's a huge benefit there. Now compare that to the Bronco Raptor. with the live valve system, it's super crazy, and that system kind of does both. When you put it in like sport mode, it'll make it so it's like stiffer, so then it'll act like these Bilsteins. But then when you're in like your off-road mode, it'll make it so that you'll get more compression at that initial point, so then it'll be softer like the Fox shocks. So you kind of get the best of both worlds with the Bronco Raptor. So I guess if you're going to be doing like 50-50 split on-road, off-road driving, Bronco Raptor, right, is going to have the most capability. That being said though, another downside of the Bronco Raptor is obviously the width. Like this, you've got the sight lines that are very clear. The Bronco Raptor out over the hood looks identical to this, so you don't realize how wide it is when you're driving it. And so that means like you could run into the potential of accidentally like hitting into stuff in parking lots and all that kind of stuff, because like you forget how wide it is, because you can't see the massive fender flares that are popping out. Again, that's not necessarily like a, I mean, it's a big deal, but it's not like a crazy big deal in my personal opinion, but it's definitely something to consider. Look how easy this is to get up here. But I guess like fully finishing things off with this whole comparison thing, and there's this like big dip here. We obviously don't want to go down that with the Bronco. Fully finishing things off with the whole comparison situation, I think that the regular Wildtrak is good for like 90% of buyers. I think 90% of buyers, this Wildtrak is going to be more, it looks cool, it's super capable off-road if you ever do, if you take it off-road every so often, which that's what most Bronco customers are going to do. Most Bronco customers are not going to be, you know, taking this off-road all the time. You're going to take it off-road maybe like what, once or twice a year, right? So this is the one to get for 90% of people. Now the other 5% of people, I think Fox shocks, if you're going to be off-roading it on a regular basis, or I shouldn't even say 5% of people, I'd say 97.5% of people, because those shocks and what this has from a capability perspective are going to be more than enough for what you're looking for. The Raptor really only comes into play if you are going to be doing tons of a high-speed off-roading. You need the stabilizer bar disconnect and the extra ground clearance, and you're okay with dealing with the width off-road. But I think for most people, with the off-roading places that you have, like in most of the US where it's pretty tight trails, this is going to be the route to go with those Fox shocks. You get the smooth ride of the Bronco Raptor, and it'll be able to handle more from a compression standpoint, right? Those shocks are a little bit more aggressive than these position-sensitive shocks. And again, it'll be a lot less expensive, and it'll be able to fit on the trails and everything. So that's my take on it. I think, like I said, 90% of people, this is perfect. The other 7.5% of people, Fox shocks on this package, and then the other 2.5% of people that, yeah, Bronco Raptor would make sense for. But obviously, there'll be a ton of people, there'll be more people that'll purchase the Bronco Raptor than this with Fox shocks, because they just want to be able to say they own a Bronco Raptor. Let me know what you guys think, but there you go. Now let's get some things up with our video going over the Wildtrak, comparing it to the Bronco Raptor and then the Fox shock version of the Wildtrak, and hopefully helping you guys decide which one you should go for. That being said, I'll see all of you in the next video.